pro-sociality without empathy. I think it'll be a little less mean and a little more.
That's true. Hello everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation. I was really excited to be invited to participate in this because I study the origins of pro-social behavior both in children and chimpanzees. But then during the organizational phase when emails were exchanged and people sent in their titles, everybody was talking about empathy, and even Paul, who's talking against empathy, is still talking about empathy. But I don't study empathy, so what do I do here? So I decided to make that the center point of my talk, that empathy is overrated. No, that there's a lot of social behavior that may not be explained by some empathic response, and I want to show you some evidence in favor of this. So when you look at studies of the origins of pro-social behavior in young children, the prototypical example are comforting behaviors. So there are many studies that go back to the 70s where the phenomenon is that someone is in pain or sad, and the measure is whether infants and toddlers will show some empathic response, will share the pain, will be sad, will be crying, and then hopefully will they intervene to comfort the other person in order to change this negative emotional state into a positive emotional state. So this is kind of the prototypical example, and many of the theories about pro-social development start out with this. Like the most comprehensive one by Martin Hoffman is that the primordial form is basically exactly this. And then from this automatic bond caring about the emotional needs of other people, we build up some pro-social and maybe then later on more abstract notions of care about other people. So that's all well and good, but I think it's very limited in scope. I think that we can not assume that this is the only origin of our pro-social motives to care about others. And so in my research, what we've claimed is that when we truly understand pro-social behavior, we have to take into account that there are actually a variety of pro-social behaviors that we engage in, and there may be different kinds of underlying processes that allow these things to be executed. And so one important one is helping behavior. So helping behavior, or more precisely instrumental helping, where it's not an emotional problem. It's not that someone is in pain or sad or something and someone else needs to do something about it. It's more like a pragmatic problem. Like someone's trying to put something away, cannot achieve a goal, but this will still count as a pro-social behavior if someone intervenes in order to facilitate that other person's more pragmatic goal. So that's one example I'm going to talk about. Another one is obviously sharing behaviors. So this is something where it may be an emotional problem that someone is really sad about not having resources or something, but in many different situations that may not be the case. The motive may be very different. It may not be that I care about your emotional state, I want to change it, therefore share resources. There may be other motives going on. So I will today talk about a few studies on helping and sharing behaviors and how they develop in ontogeny, and also delve into some comparative work a little bit as well. So the first thing I want to talk about helping behaviors and instrumental helping behaviors. And so for me, this studies started when I was reading, in preparation for my PhD, I was reading work by Andy Meltzoff, who has these neat studies on children not copying what they see another person do if this was just accidental, but they copy what the person is trying but failing to do it. And the argument here is that the kids starting around 18 months, and we were going to show even earlier, are able to reason beyond the information given, are able to make some inferences about the intention the other person had. And so I thought, well, people have measured this in imitation measures, but another way to test that is helping behavior. So, because also here, if you want to help with a pragmatic problem, you have to be able to understand that the person is trying but failing to achieve a goal. And so what resulted from this was a series of experiments to probe children's ability to infer these kinds of action goals, and the question to what extent they would then be motivated to help pro-socially to intervene with them. So I see so many familiar faces. I'm so afraid that people are just bored watching these videos, so I will still show the videos. But I will have an agenda here, so we start with a historical document of the first time I thought about this idea and jotted it down. So you see here, and this is German, I'm not going to translate this for you. So here the idea is that someone is trying but failing to achieve a goal, drop an object there and can get it, and there is an infant watching this. I have no idea why I thought it was a good idea to put this adult onto a table. Okay, but this is how it started. And then I went to Leipzig to work at the Max Planck Institute there, and then we developed several tasks with the same basic idea, but obviously a bit more sophisticated. And the idea here is that in all these situations, someone is trying but failing to achieve a goal, and we want to see if an 18-month-old will have the tendency to help. So in this split screen, you see me standing on the right, hanging towels on a clothesline, and then accidentally dropping a clothespin on the floor while this 18-month-old is watching. Kids help in this situation, but they don't pick up the clothespin and return it in a control condition in which I throw the clothespin on the floor on purpose and don't reach for it. So this controls for the possibility that kids are OCD and think that clothespins don't belong on the floor, or they just will use this as an excuse to interact with me, or they think it's fun, do that again. So by the contrast between control and experimental indicates that maybe they're really interested in helping with my goal. As I mentioned earlier, the interest here is also to see to what extent kids are making actual inferences about goals. So we try to test them in various different kinds of situations. This one is something where you can think, well, they've encountered this before, maybe at home, had the same problem. Someone maybe told them what to do in these kinds of contexts. So to get at the question whether they are creative in their inferences, we then created a situation that was novel. The situation they could not have encountered before, and therefore could not have been told what to do and so forth. And so one situation we created was this one, where first another experimenter showed the kid this novel box, which had a flap on the side and a hole on top. And then they demonstrated that they were able to use the flap in order to retrieve stuff from the inside. And then later, I came in with my cup of tea and a spoon that I then accidentally dropped through the hole. Oh. And also here we find that kids help in this situation, but they don't do it if I throw the spoon through the hole on purpose and don't reach for it. So again, it's not that they want to do this over and over again. It seems to be geared towards my particular problem. And so what we found is that starting around 18 months and in simpler tasks within 14 months, children are able to help across a variety of contexts. So very early emergence of this instrumental helping behavior. So here's just some examples of the kind of situations in which they are able to intervene. And I also want to mention in this idea of like some replication crisis, that there's actually a replication bonanza when it comes to showing that these instrumental helping behaviors emerge around toddlerhood. And so what I want to now do is probe a little bit the extent to which these behaviors are pro-social and to what extent they're actually really flexible. So the examples I've shown you here were ones where the kid maybe didn't have anything better to do but to help, right? They're just hanging out with mom, that's boring. So what we, and the other thing was also that they didn't have to do much, like they just crawl over and pick up a clothespin. So what would they do if we increased the cost a little bit? So what we did in this situation was that the kid had fun playing in a ball pool while an experimenter is performing a task and then drops a pen on the ground.
Mama, guck, das wird big.
All right, so what we find is that kids continue to help, even if there are some costs in the form of effort, surmounting obstacles, climbing out of stuff, or opportunity costs that they have to leave behind a fun activity in order to help. So this indicates to us that kids are actually willing to really put some effort into these helping behaviors in the case of costs. The flip side of costs are obviously benefits. So the question is, maybe kids expect to be rewarded for their helping behavior. But what we have found is that in most of the studies, they never get a reward, and we have repeated trials, and it really doesn't extinguish. It's also that, so it really doesn't seem to be necessary to elicit this behavior. And as a matter of fact, when we compare a group of kids who is rewarded for helping with a group of kids who's never rewarded for helping in these kinds of out-of-reach situations, and there is no difference between these two groups in the immediate situation. However, we found in one study that actually, when it comes to future helping behaviors, these rewards can undermine kids' intrinsic motivation. So when one group of kids received a reward every time they helped, and another group did not receive a reward every time they helped, later on, when there was no reward available, those kids who had been rewarded were now less likely to provide help than those who had not been rewarded. So the implication here is that maybe kids, if they're intrinsically motivated to help, these rewards undermine or crowd out that intrinsic motivation. So last but not least, I want to address one thing, which is that in these situations, there are very strong cues about the problem, someone reaching for an object or squeezing hand through, stuff like that. So maybe it's necessary that, and some of this stuff can even be interpreted as a kind of implicit communicative cue about help me out here. But when we look around in adults, we find that we would help in very different kinds of situations. So imagine someone's walking along the street and dropped the wallet on the ground and just keeps walking. I think you would probably pick up the wallet and warn the other about the problem and walk behind the person to help. So the interesting situation about this is that here, the person isn't even aware of the problem and therefore could not communicate anything about the problem, but you were still able to make the right inferences that this is something the person could not have wanted to happen and would be prosocially inclined to intervene. So we implemented this in kids to see whether kids are not only helping reactively in response to some behavioral or communicative cue, but also proactively without the absence of all these cues. The way we implemented was this. It's a bird's eye view of the testing room with two tables that have milk cans on it. And the experimenter is putting these milk cans away in the experimental condition, and the child is having fun playing with the game on the left. But while the child is playing, one of the cans is rolling off the table and lands on the floor. And the question is whether kids would be willing to help, first realize that help is needed and would provide that. And so here is the example, the kid playing with the game, and you will see a can dropping over on the right. So we find that 18-month-olds are not yet able to do that, but starting at 2 years of age, children reliably help in this experimental condition you saw here, but wouldn't pick up the milk can in the control condition in which either the person didn't care whether cans were on the table or not, or had thrown it off intentionally. So what this shows is that starting at 2 years of age at least, kids are really flexible in these helping behaviors, and this proactive helping shows us that they're really quite cognitively advanced in making the right inferences, and provides further support for the idea that they're really pro-socially motivated to help others with their problems. And you may notice that in this last study there wasn't even a parent in the room, so this is also what we have been doing now, that the parents are not there whether the parent is in group or not, we manipulated that, had also no effect. So it's not a case that parents are just puppet masters in the background that pull the strings. It seems like children really individually make these kinds of decisions. And so I think one important take-home message from this is that when you look at these instrumental helping behaviors, you realize that this is emerging very early, it's quite flexible, it doesn't seem to be driven by rewards, and it is happening at an age where many of the kinds of socialization practices that we assume may be driving this, so internalization of norms or a long history of being rewarded that then becomes internalized work by Bartol from the 80s, all of these claims seem to be challenged by this idea. So it seems that maybe there is some kind of biological predisposition upon which socialization practices can build, but socialization practices of this nature are not the actual origin of this. One problem with this claim, like with any kind of developmental claim with young children, is that some kind of divine intervention. I should address other problems with this. Yeah, so the problem with these kinds of things is obviously that you can always make a claim that, well, it took 14 months, so there may be kids actually are completely selfish individuals, and it just takes 14 months to reprogram them into becoming also altruistic. So this is really a problem, and you cannot really solve it, I think, if you study only children. You have to look at our closest evolutionary relatives, such as the chimpanzees. The logic here being that if it is actually driven by human unique practices such as cultural norms and so forth, then you would not expect any of these behaviors in chimpanzees. If, however, this was something that the last common ancestor of chimpanzees and humans share, maybe had already, then we may find that in chimpanzees as well. And I will not be able to go over all the studies, but what we have found in many studies now is that also chimpanzees help with these out-of-reach situations or opening doors for others, showing some cognitive flexibility, including novel situations. They are willing to put some effort into this and opportunity cost in order to help. Most surprisingly, at least to us, rewarding chimpanzees for helping had no effect on their behavior, so it also doesn't seem to be driven by an expectation of receiving rewards. However, when it comes to the question of proactive helping versus reactive helping, when we see, and this was mainly a study by Melis and others, when we compare situations in which the recipient can signal the problem, subjects are willing to help. If the recipient is just waiting and hoping that the other one will release a mechanism in order to get some food over to the other side, they're less likely to do that. So at the moment, we're not totally sure if this is the difference is in some cognitive difference that proactive helping just requires a little bit more inferences that need to be made, or it's something where it's more motivational and they always need a nudge to help. But what seems to be apparent from these studies is that when one critical difference is really in the extent to which reactive versus proactive helping behaviors are part of the repertoire of the different species. All right, so this is the part on helping behaviors. And I want to share some thoughts on sharing behaviors as well. And just to point out, there is now a lot of evidence from different labs that also toddlers share resources with others. So another evidence that at least if the problem is made salient, that someone cannot continue playing a game or cannot eat and so forth, and people are signaling the problem, and also young kids are willing to relinquish a resource in order to help another person. So also sharing behaviors like these instrumental helping behaviors are early emerging. But then you know that not all sharing behavior is driven by pro-social motives, where you really care about the other person. Maybe something where it's in your long-term self-interest. So what you now wonder probably is to what extent this is something that characterizes early or late sharing behaviors, because it could be that children start sharing because they just realize, oh, the other one is reciprocating. So when I'm sharing now, this is good for me as long as the other one is sharing back with me later. So this is something that obviously is an important aspect of many cognitive or pro-social behavior behaviors in adults. But when does that develop in kids? So what we did to test this was we tested 3 5-year-olds in a task where kids learned at table 1, you would always play with the regular ramp. So you put a marble into the funnel there, it rolls down, it's a lot of fun, but it disappears. So it's a depletable resource. So that's fun. But playing the fancy machine at table 2 is even more fun, okay? The problem is that the partner has control of the resources at table 2, while the child has control of the resources at table 1. So this, then the partner is a head puppet. Actually, they start out playing at table 1. The child can decide how many to give or how many to keep to play at the regular ramp, and then they move over to the other side where the partner is always playing tit for tat, right? So the idea is that if you pick up on the tit for tat structure of this, you should share more than in this experimental condition. Then in a control condition where kids learn that at table 2, they're just going to play 2 individual games, and so no sharing will be possible. Here's what we find. At 3 years of age, children are oblivious to that, so they're not able to take advantage of this future reciprocation. But starting at 5 years of age, children share significantly more often in the reciprocity over the other condition. Okay, so with this, I want to give you one more evidence for this, that maybe there is some notion of some future-directed thinking that might be going on, right? So there's a lot of evidence in developmental psychology that between 3 and 5 years of age, children become able to really think about the future. And just, we have not completed this study totally, but I want to give you some hints of this. So what we did in another study was that we looked at a partner choice situation. So here it was about how diets regulate their behavior with each other. But there are also situations where you have to think about how much to share with someone. If there is another person, this partner could choose to interact with in the future, right? So the idea is, will children realize that it may pay off for the future to be nice to someone now, basically bribing the other individual to get a return favor in the future? The way we set it up is that we always had a game owner who had this fun game, like a maze or something like that. And the child and the competitor had an attractive and an unattractive item in front of them, and they had to make the decision which one to share with the game owner. And they knew that the game owner will later choose someone to play with, right? So the smart thing to do is maybe, and we tested that they liked the games much more than the resources. So the smart thing to do would be to bribe the other person in order to be chosen later. And this is contrasted with the control condition in which this is a one-player game, so the game owner is not choosing anyone to play with, they're just played individually, and so here the resource would actually be wasted. And here are our preliminary results. We tested 3, 5, and 7-year-olds. 3-year-olds just completed, so they're not able to analyze the data yet. But what you see is that there's a main effect of age. That's not surprising. Older kids usually are more prosocial. But importantly, there is a main effect of condition and a condition by trial interaction. So what you see is that at both ages, kids are not sharing very much in the control conditions, so around 30%. This is kind of what you get in dictator games with kids. I mean, it's going down. But importantly, they kind of learn over trials that it pays off in the long term to bribe the other individual. So the 7-year-olds, they don't pick up on it on trial 1, so it seems they need to experience this once, but then they significantly more often share in experimental than control. And the 5-year-olds, they need a little bit longer to pick up on that. As I said, I haven't analyzed the 3-year-olds, but looking at the means, it seems like they're not differentiated. All right, that's it for today. The summary being that when we look at these behaviors, we find across many domains that very young children are already willing to act pro-socially, but then obviously more strategic concerns also come into play, but this is something that requires maybe a little bit more cognitive sophistication that in children develops somewhat later in life. Thank you very much.